The first thing Empress Verathshal noticed about the human was his hands. They were calloused across the base of each finger, the skin pale and ridged where old impact had left its permanent record. He was standing in the detention bay of her flagship, the Voreth's Fang, wrists bound in a Korathi restraint lattice that would incinerate the nervous system of any species with more than 4 digits per hand. He had 5. The lattice was not incinerated. He was not howling. He was standing with his weight slightly forward on the balls of his feet, the way a man stands when he is deciding something, and he was looking at the walls of the bay with an expression Verathshal had never catalogued in 17 years of field command. He looked interested. "Commander," said Subregent Othar, at her elbow, "we have positively identified him as Jaketh Tanaka, a human male, age 43 standard years. He is a former Special Operations soldier, currently listed as a civilian contractor for the Hegemony survey teams. He was embedded with the Archaeological Research Party on Theta Crucis 9 when we killed them all," Verathshal said. "Yes." She watched Jaketh Tanaka tilt his head and study the lattice on his wrists. He turned one hand over, then the other. He pressed one of the joints with his thumb, exploring, the way a child might investigate an interesting insect. Then he looked up and directly at the observation window, and Verathshal stepped back from the glass before she remembered that the window was dark from his side. He could not see her. She told herself that and almost believed it. "What does he want?" she asked. Othar's secondary crest fanned slightly, the Vori equivalent of a frown. "He has said nothing. He has not demanded release. He has not invoked the survey compact protections. He simply," Othar paused, "he simply asked us to bring the body of a boy." "What boy?" "That is what we cannot determine. There is no boy among the dead at Theta Crucis 9. All remains were catalogued. We count 17 humans and 1 Kethmar observer. There is no boy." Verathshal looked at the human again. His hands had stopped moving. He was standing still now, chin slightly down, and she recognized from years of reading Alien Captives that this was not defeat. This was patience. This was a thing waiting. She had conquered 41 worlds. She had taken into custody 712 intelligent life forms across the span of her career, and she knew what a broken thing looked like. Jaketh Tanaka did not look broken. "Open the bay," she said. Othar's crest spread to its full alarm width. "Empress." "Open the bay, I will speak with him." The Korathi lattice was supposed to make a sound when it was active, a low subsonic hum that Vori biology processed as mild discomfort, discouraging the captive from thinking too hard about escape. Jaketh Tanaka had been listening to it for 3 hours. He had catalogued the frequency, mapped its pulse intervals, and determined that there was a 0.4-second gap every 47 seconds when the emission dropped by 17%. He did not know if that gap was enough to work with. He was still calculating when the bay door opened. She was taller than he'd expected. The intelligence files on Empress Verathshal described her as small for a Vori, but Vori ran to 7 feet at the shoulder even among the diminutive, so the description was relative. She came in alone, which surprised him, and she stood across the bay from him with her 4 arms folded in a configuration he knew meant assessment. She was reading him the way he'd been reading the lattice. He let her. "You asked for the body of a boy," she said. Her hegemony standard was excellent, better than most of her generals, who communicated through translators. Her voice had a harmonic quality that Vori speech carried, a secondary tone below the primary one, like a chord struck on a string that had no name. "There is no boy." "There is," Jack said. "His name is Brad. He's 14. He was in the lower excavation unit when your ships came over." A long silence. The lattice hummed its count. He was at 31 seconds. "We conducted a full sweep," Verathshal said. "Thermal, spectral, molecular trace identification. There was nothing in the lower excavation unit that was alive." I know. She stared at him. You know he is dead. I know that whatever you did to the site shut down every active system within the radius, including him. Including him. He was in a neural interface cradle. It's a piece of medical equipment that Dr. James, Jack stopped. He restarted. It's a piece of equipment developed for trauma cases, kids who have had spinal injury. Brad can't walk, he can't talk. The cradle runs a constant neural mapping process and it keeps his sensory experience functional. He looked at her steadily. When you burned the site, you shut down the cradle. Everything Brad can perceive, everything he can experience, you deleted it. 39 seconds, 8 to go. He is still biologically alive, Jack said. His body functions without the cradle, but his mind is, he searched for the word. He is in there, but there's nothing coming in. No sight, no sound, no input of any kind. It's a prison with no walls, no floor, no ceiling, nothing. He has been in that darkness since your ships came. You speak of this as if it is my responsibility, Verathshol said. I speak of it as a fact, Jack said. What I'm asking you to do about it is something different. 47 seconds, the lattice dipped. He moved. The Korathi restraint lattice was designed by engineers who had, in their wisdom, tested it on every intelligent species in the hegemony database and certified it unbreakable. The database did not contain a species that had spent 40,000 years perfecting the understanding of leverage, joint locks, and the biomechanics of the human wrist. It did not account for a man who had spent 22 years in professional full-contact competition, who had broken his own hands so many times they had rebuilt themselves denser than they started, who had spent the last 3 hours listening to the pulse of a locking mechanism and calculating the window. The lattice did not incinerate him. It tried. In the 0.4-second window, Jack rotated his left wrist against the interior joint of the right binding, applied 40 pounds of controlled torque, and something inside the lattice that was not supposed to yield yielded. The bindings dropped. He did not attack her. He stood with his hands at his sides and looked at her. I need to show you something, he said, and then I need your help. Verathshol looked at the lattice on the floor. She looked at his hands, the calloused ridges across the base of his fingers, the slightly forward weight on his feet. You could not reach the door before my guards arrived, she said. I know, he said. I'm not trying to reach the door. Another long silence. Her secondary crests moved in a pattern he couldn't read. Show me, she said. Dr. James Tanaka was 67 years old, had 3 doctoral degrees and 1 broken nose that hadn't set correctly in 2031, and was currently the most wanted civilian in the Hegemony Survey Network. He was also Jack's father, and Jack had spent the last 8 years being furious with him, and seeing him sitting in the corner of a Vori medical bay with his hands wrapped around a cold cup of something hot was more complicated than Jack had capacity for right now. He was in the cradle, his father said without looking up. I checked the uplink logs. His conscious state was mapped at 94.7% integration at the time of the strike. Meaning what? Jack said. Meaning when the cradle shut down, his neural state was fully engaged. He wasn't surfaced. He was deep in. His father finally looked up. His eyes were red-rimmed and old. When the power cut, he was in a full immersion state. His sensory cortex was entirely dependent on the cradle for input. How long can he sustain that? Indefinitely. His brain will keep functioning. His body will keep functioning. He'll need fluid intake, nutrition, but his experience, his father's jaw tightened. Without input, the human mind creates its own. After 6 hours in full sensory deprivation, hallucination onset is nearly universal. After 72 hours, the hallucinations become self-reinforcing. His brain will build a world out of its own architecture, a world that has no connection to anything outside. And if we restore the cradle, if we restore it, his sensory cortex re-engages with external input and his father exhaled. He wakes up, but the cradle was destroyed in the strike. The hardware, the calibration data, everything. We would need to rebuild the mapping interface from scratch, and it would need to be precisely attuned to his specific neural signature, because he's been mapped in that system since he was 9 years old, and the architecture of his neural pathway it's unique. It's built around years of input from that specific device. His father set down the cup. I know what I'm asking you. You're asking me to go in, Jack said. The Vori have a construct they use for tactical planning, a neural environment simulation. It's not identical to the cradle, but the base technology is similar enough that you want me to go into a Vori military simulation system to find Brad. I want you to enter the environment his mind has built and bring him back to the surface before the architecture becomes permanent. His father's voice was flat with exhaustion and old guilt. Every hour he's in there, his brain builds more, reinforces the structures, fills in the walls. After a point, the constructed reality becomes more real to his nervous system than the actual world, and there's no distinction he can make anymore. He stops being lost and starts. His father stopped. Starts being trapped, Jack said. Yes. Jack looked at the wall for a while. Through it, somewhere in the medical section of the Vorath's fang, his son's body lay in a Vori sustenance frame, alive and empty and alone inside whatever his own mind had made for him. You didn't tell me he was using the cradle, Jack said. You would have stopped it. Yes. Another silence. The kind of silence between two men who had said the important things too late and too few times and knew it. The Empress, Jack said, you've been talking to her. She is, his father hesitated. She is interested in the technology. The cradle has applications that the Vori have not considered. Neural mapping at the resolution Brad's system achieved, applied to Vori military rehabilitation. He paused. She wants him recovered as much as we do. For different reasons. How reassuring, Jack said and stood. Tell me about the simulation. Verath Shull had commissioned 43 neural environment simulations in her career, all of them for tactical analysis, and she had never entered one herself. Simulation entry was a thing that subordinates did, analysts and planners who mapped enemy terrain and resource distribution and defensive architecture from the inside of a constructed space, walking through probable futures while their bodies sat in acceleration chairs and their brains processed a reality that wasn't there. She watched her engineers calibrate the interface for the human, and she felt something she had not felt in a long time. She felt uncertain. The signal architecture of the human brain is not identical to the Vori, said Chief Engineer Vaseth, not looking up from the calibration panel. The interface was not designed for this. There will be translation artifacts, things in the environment that the human brain renders differently than the Vori baseline. Can you mitigate that? She said. I can reduce it to acceptable parameters. Vaseth glanced at the human, who was sitting in the acceleration chair with the patience of something much older than his species' recorded history. What I cannot do is guarantee that what he experiences inside corresponds to what the boy's mind has built. The translation layer may distort. What is your confidence estimate that he can bring the boy's consciousness back to the surface? Vaseth's crest dimmed. Empress, I am not able to give you a meaningful estimate. I am not a xenoneurologist. I am not a human neurologist. I am an engineer who is trying to build a bridge between two biological architectures that have never been directly interfaced, in order to send one human's mind into the interior world of another human's mind, which is running inside a military tactical simulation that was not designed for human neural frequency ranges. A pause. My confidence estimate is that contractor Tanaka will survive the entry. Beyond that, I cannot speak with honesty. Verath Shull looked at Jack. You heard that? Yes, he said. And he looked up at her. The light in the simulation bay was amber, Vori spectrum, slightly warm for human eyes, and it caught the old breaks in his hands and the newer ones, and the ones that hadn't healed right and the ones that had. "I heard you tell me that my son has been alone in his own head since your ships came," he said. "That's what I'm thinking about." She looked at him a long time. "I will monitor the simulation feed," she said. "The environment your son's mind has constructed will be rendered on the tactical display. I will see what you see." "Good," he said. "When I find him, I'm going to need you to pull us both out at the same time." "That is not standard extraction protocol. Standard extraction severs the neural link in sequence. If you sever mine first, Brad's link remains active and he's still in there. If you sever his first, the environment collapses while I'm still present, and I don't know what that does to a human brain." He looked at her steadily. "You need to pull us out together. Same instant. I will need to build a synchronized extraction protocol that does not exist in current system architecture," Vaseth said. "Then you have until I wake up to build it," Jack said. Verathshal watched the engineer look at the human, and then at his console, and then at his engineers, and then back at the human. She watched him make the calculation she had been making since the moment the restraint lattice dropped. 12 minutes, Vaseth said. "I can build it in 12 minutes. "I'll wait," Jack said. The world Brad had made was underwater. That was the first thing Jack understood when the simulation resolved around him. He was standing on the floor of something vast and slow. The light coming down from a surface so far above it was more like memory than light, and the pressure was wrong, too light for depth. The way a dream misunderstands physics, and everything was very quiet in the way that deep water is quiet, which is not quiet at all but simply a different kind of sound. The floor under his feet was sand. He looked down. It was the pale, specific sand of a beach his son had liked before the accident, when Brad could still run and there had been summer and no reason to worry about the things that came later. Jack recognized it immediately, and it hit him in a way the combat simulations never had. The recognition that the landscape of a mind is made of the things it loves. Brad had made himself an ocean. He had made it wrong in the way that brains make things wrong when they work too hard alone. The water above him was too still, the light too even, the sand too smooth, and here and there across the floor there were objects that did not belong to the ocean at all. A chair from somewhere, a shelf of books. Jack walked toward the nearest and recognized his father's medical texts, the ones that had lived in the study in Seattle, and he felt the floor of the simulation shift slightly under his feet, a tremor in the architecture. His brain was being rendered here. The translation layer Vaseth had warned him about was not distortion. It was overlap, his own memories bleeding into the edges of his son's construction, the interface unable to separate two human minds clearly. He could see what Brad had made, but he was also, at the margins, beginning to fill it with his own textures. He needed to move. He moved. The underwater world of Brad Tanaka's mind was not entirely without danger. It had been building for hours, maybe longer, and the places where his son's fear had constructed the environment were thick and unsteady in ways Jack did not have words for, territories of the simulation that seemed to bend away from approach, that generated a sensation not unlike walking into a room where something bad had recently happened. His son had not built monsters. 14-year-old boys with no body and no sensory input and no data except their own mental architecture did not build dragons or demons or classic nightmare physics. They built absence. The spaces of Brad's mind where the construction had failed were holes, not dark holes, not cave mouths, just absences. Places where the ocean floor stopped and there was nothing on the other side. No color, no darkness, just the termination of the built reality. And these holes were what Jack had to navigate around because Vaseth's warning had been more precise than it sounded. Every time he approached one of the absences too closely, the translation layer flickered, and he felt the interface destabilizing. his own neural signal drifting from the frequency that kept him present here. He could get lost here, he understood that now. He could get lost here very easily, and no one would know what had happened to him, because the environment would simply stop rendering. And upstairs on the Voreth's Fang, the tactical display would show a signal dropout, and Verathshul would see nothing, and know nothing, and Vasith's synchronized extraction protocol would execute on a signal that was no longer coherent. He could get lost here, and Brad would still be alone. He stopped walking. He stood in the middle of the too smooth sand and the deep light and the wrong silence, and he did something he hadn't done in 3 years. He called his son's name. Brad. His voice moved through the simulation water the way sound moves through deep water, the way whales move through it. Something that is not a wave but is not nothing either. It spread and it changed, and it traveled in somewhere in the architecture of what his son had made. It arrived. The ocean floor shifted. Not the tremor of the translation layer. Something else, something deliberate, something that knew. Jack watched a shape resolve out of the too-even light about 40 feet ahead of him. It was the silhouette of a boy sitting on the seafloor, legs crossed, the position Brad used in the cradle. He recognized it immediately, the specific geometry of a body that had learned to be still. The boy was not looking at him. He walked toward him. The sand made no sound under his feet. He crossed the 40 feet and stopped and crouched down to bring himself level with the sitting figure, the way you do with someone who has been alone a long time in a small space. "Hey," Jack said. Brad's simulation self turned. He looked exactly as Jack had last seen him, 7 months ago at the research base, older than he should have been in the way that kids with long medical histories look older, something around the eyes that isn't sadness exactly but is adjacent to it. He looked at his father for a long moment with an expression that was trying to decide whether to believe in what it was seeing. "This isn't real," Brad said. "No," Jack said, "but I am. You can't be here. Your grandfather built the cradle for a reason. I'm here the same way." Brad looked at his hands. The simulation gave him his hands back, the hands he'd had before, the ones that worked, and Jack watched his son look at them with an expression that was grief and wonder mixed in a proportion that no person who hadn't seen it would be able to describe accurately. He looked at them for a long time. "How long have I been here?" Brad said. "Too long," Jack said. "We're going to leave." "I don't know how to leave." "You don't have to. I'm going to bring you out." He paused. "But I need you to want to come." Brad looked up. "What does that mean?" "It means the extraction pulls on your signal, your neural signature. If you're resistant, if your brain is holding on here, the signal is harder to read." He looked at his son steadily. "I need you to be ready to let go of this." Brad looked around the ocean floor his mind had made, the specific sand, his grandfather's books, the too smooth world he had built out of silence and time. The 14-year-old careful arithmetic of what a brain does when it has nothing else to work with. "I made this," Brad said, not asking, knowing. "Yes. It's wrong." "It's yours," Jack said. "That's different." He held out his hand. Not the simulation's rendering of his hand. He reached through it, past it, toward the specific geometry of his son's neural signal, the thing Vasith's interface was tracking. "Come on." Brad looked at his hand. He looked at his father's face. "Are they going to take the cradle away?" he said. "When we get back." Jack thought about the Empress watching the tactical display, the interested way she had looked at the lattice on the floor, the things his father had said about applications. "No," he said, "I don't think so." Brad reached out and took his hand. On the Voreth's Fang's tactical display, Empress Verathshul watched 2 human neural signals resolve into perfect alignment and begin to rise through the architecture of the constructed environment. And she felt, for the second time in less than a day, something she had not felt in a long time. "Extraction ready," Vasith said. "Hold." Empress, the synchronized window is. Hold, she said, quieter. On the display, the two signals moved. She had watched many things in tactical space: the advance of fleets, the withdrawal of armies, the slow dying of ecosystems that her decisions had made uninhabitable. She had never watched a father move through his son's mind toward the surface. She watched the absences, the holes in the construction where the boy had not been able to build anything. She saw how many there were and how large and how close together, and she thought about what her engineers had told her: 6 hours to hallucination, 72 to self-reinforcing architecture, and she calculated how long the boy had been inside before his father arrived. The number was not something she was comfortable with. The signals reached the surface layer. Extract, she said. Vasith executed the synchronized protocol in the 12 minutes he had promised, and it worked because he was an engineer who understood that 12 minutes was what he had, and so 12 minutes was enough. And both signals terminated cleanly at the same instant, and in 2 separate bays on the Vorath's Fang, Jacob Tanaka and Brad Tanaka opened their eyes. She went to see him after. This was unusual. She did not visit captives. She did not owe explanations or acknowledgments to the individuals whose worlds she absorbed into the Vori hegemony's expansion, and she had held to this principle for 17 years as a matter of command clarity. She went anyway. The boy was sitting up in the sustenance frame, which was not built for human proportions, and he looked small in it, small and tired and more alive than the tactical display had suggested a human could look in a medical frame. He had his grandfather's texts open in his lap. One of the engineers had retrieved them from the simulation data, rendered and printed, a gesture Verathshal had not authorized but was choosing not to address. He looked up when she came in. She stood at the appropriate distance. She waited. "You watched," he said. "Yes." "You saw what I built." "Yes." He looked at the book in his lap. "It was the right beach," he said. "I got the sand right." "Yes," she said, "you did." He was quiet for a moment. "My grandfather says you want the cradle technology." "Variations of it," she said. "For applications our own neural interface work has not yet reached." "In exchange for what?" She looked at him. 14 years old, medical history older than most of her lieutenant's combat experience. A mind that had built an entire ocean out of nothing and populated it with specific sand and his grandfather's books, and waited in the silence with the patience of someone who had learned patience very young. "In exchange for your team's lives," she said. "The survey personnel, I will return them and classify the Theta Crucis 9 site as protected. They're alive." She paused. "They were not killed, they were detained." "I said we killed them." "You lied to my father." "I allowed your father to believe they were dead to reduce the probability of organized rescue attempts before we had secured the site." She paused. "That is not a comfortable fact, but it is a fact." Brad looked at her for a long time. He had eyes the color of the sand he had made in his mind, that pale, specific gray gold, and he looked at her the way his father had looked at the restraint lattice, with interest rather than fear. "Tell my grandfather," he said finally. He stopped. "He thinks they're dead." "I will tell him." A pause. "The cradle, if you use it for Vori rehab, you'll need to adjust the calibration protocols. My neural signature has changed 3 times in 5 years because the mapping has to recalibrate when the brain adjusts to the interface. You'd need to build in adaptive calibration." He said this the way he might say something about the books in his lap, practical, precise, without drama. "I can write up what I know about it, if that helps." She looked at him. "You would provide technical assistance to us." "If you return my people," he said, "and if my grandfather gets to keep the research." Another pause. "And if you tell me the truth about things." "Truth is," she said, "a complicated commitment for a Vori empress to make." "I know," he said. "I'm not asking for all of it, just the relevant parts." She considered this. She had made treaties with 29 species and 14 independent polities, and she had never conducted preliminary negotiations with a 14-year-old boy in a medical frame who was built like a scholar and spoke like a veteran. She found the experience disorienting in a way that was not unpleasant. "That is acceptable," she said. Jack found his father in the corridor outside the medical bay, sitting on the floor with his back to the wall. He sat down next to him. They stayed that way for a while, not talking, which was their oldest and most practiced mode of being in the same place. "He's all right," Jack said. "I know." His father's voice was steady in the way that voices go steady after the shaking is done. "I saw the extraction on Vasith's display." A pause. "I saw what he'd built in there." "The ocean." "We went to that beach," his father said. When he was 5. He made me carry him on my back into the surf because he wanted to feel it, and I told him the water was too cold, and he told me." His father stopped. "He told me that was my problem, not his." Jack looked at the wall. "He's still him," he said. "He's still exactly him." His father was quiet for a long time. "What did you give her, the Empress?" "Nothing. Brad's negotiating." His father turned to look at him. "Brad. He's got her on adaptive calibration protocols, and he hasn't mentioned the mapping depth research yet. He's saving that." Jack stood. "I think he's going to be fine." His father stayed on the floor for a moment longer. Then he said, "I'm sorry I didn't tell you about the cradle." Jack looked at him. He looked at the old broken nose that hadn't set right, and the hands that looked like his own hands in 30 years, and the specific color of the eyes that Brad had inherited and was currently using to negotiate technology transfer terms with the Vori hegemony. "I know," he said. "We'll talk about it when we're home." His father looked up. "She's letting us go." "Brad's negotiating," Jack said again. "I think so." She watched the human ships leave from the command deck of the Vorath's Fang. The boy, Brad Tanaka, had ultimately provided 4 hours of technical documentation on adaptive neural calibration, 3 appendices on long-term neural mapping in non-ambulatory patients, and 1 condition that she had not anticipated. He wanted a Vori medical liaison embedded with the survey team at their next site, someone who would have access to the cradle research in exchange for Vori xenoneurology data the survey team didn't have. She had agreed. She was still not entirely sure when she had agreed to things. He had not pushed. He had not argued. He had asked questions and listened to her answers and asked more questions. And at some point in that conversation, she had found herself describing the gaps in Vori neural interface research with a specificity she reserved for briefings to her inner counsel. And then he had said, gently, that it seemed like the logical next step would be shared access, and she had said yes. She was aware, reviewing the exchange, that she had been negotiated. She was aware, reviewing the rest of the day, that his father had broken a Korathi restraint lattice with his bare hands. She was aware that the elder Dr. Tanaka had built a piece of technology in a civilian research context that her own military engineers were now treating as a classified priority acquisition. She was aware that she had lied about 17 people's deaths to ensure tactical advantage, and that a 14-year-old boy had accepted this information, processed it, and used it as a bargaining chip within approximately 90 seconds of receiving it. She stood at the window and watched the survey team's transport go to FTL, and she thought about the old human files in her intelligence archive, the ones that called them short-lived, physically soft, technologically inferior. Their history, a series of local conflicts with no galactic significance, a species still arguing over the ownership of a single star system. She thought about the beach her son had built from memory in the dark. She thought about the weight that Jacob Tanaka had stayed forward on as he stood in the detention bay, the specific, patient weight of a man who had not yet decided to stop. "Subregent," she said. Athar materialized at her elbow. Empress. Update the intelligence assessment on humans. What classification level? She looked at the FTL signature, where the transport had been. Priority 1, she said, and flag it for the Admiralty. What is the nature of the update? She thought about the word that had not been in the old files, the word that should have been first. Adaptable, she said. Start there. 3 weeks later, in the medical bay of the Keth Vila survey station, Brad Tanaka was mapping neural calibration points on a display that had been rebuilt twice since the Theta Crucis 9 incident, using notes he had written from memory because the originals had been in the cradle when it burned. He had made it better. This was not unusual. It was, he had discovered, what happened when you built a thing and then lost the thing and had to build it again from what you remembered. You built the parts that mattered and left out the parts that were just habit, and the thing that came back was leaner and more itself than the thing you'd lost. He had read that somewhere, probably in one of his grandfather's books, probably before the accident. His father came in from the corridor and looked at the display and said nothing for a long moment, which was his version of approval. The Vori liaison arrives Thursday, Brad said. Your grandfather tells me she has a background in spinal regeneration research. I know, I requested her specifically. He adjusted a calibration point. She's been working on a nerve signal reconstruction protocol that's adjacent to what I'm doing here with the mapping depth. I think if we combine. Brad, his father said. He looked up. Jack was standing at the door with his hands in his pockets, the way he stood when he wasn't calculating anything, when he was just standing. How are you? Not the medical version, the other version. Brad considered the question. He thought about the ocean floor, the specific sand, the books arranged in the deep light, the absences he'd built around the edges where his mind had run out of material. He thought about the moment a hand had reached through the simulation toward him and what it had felt like to know, past fear, past the architecture, past 17 hours of constructed silence, that someone had come. Good, he said, he meant it, I'm good. His father nodded. He stayed at the door for a moment and Brad saw him catalog the room the way he always cataloged rooms, exits, positions, the forward weight on his feet, and then he let it go. Let his weight settle back. Let the room be a room. I'm going to get food, Jack said. You want anything? Brad looked at the calibration display. He thought about the Vori liaison's research. He thought about what his grandfather had said that morning about the long-term applications. He thought about the ocean floor and how he had built it from memory and how it had been, in its way, beautiful. Anything's fine, he said. His father left. The display ran its calibration sequence. Brad reached out and adjusted a single point by 0.003 degrees and watched the neural map sharpen into focus. He got the beach right, he thought. He got it right.